Thank you very much for being here. It's lovely to see you all, and I think we have a really enjoyable evening ahead of us. So my name is Paul Glendinning. I'm the president of the IMA, the Institute for Mathematics and its Applications, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here. The IMA is a member-based institute that is for the mathematics community. So we do things, we support people across industry, across education, and across academia to do mathematics and to link up with mathematicians and be part of that community. Part of what we do is to recognise wonderful things that people do in that community, and that's what tonight is about. So we have two fantastic presentations, but I want to start by the first prize presentation. So the first presentation this evening is the 2023 Graham Hoare Prize. So the Graham Hoare Prize is awarded annually to early career mathematicians for a brilliant Mathematics Today article. Mathematics Today is the house magazine, if you like, of the IMA. And it's aimed at everyone who's interested in mathematics. The prize was named after Graham Hoare for his valuable contribution to the IMA and the wider mathematics community, especially in encouraging young mathematicians. For 20 years, Graham was the Mathematics Today letters editor. So I have a huge pleasure this evening in presenting the 2023 Graham Hoare Prize to Matthew Cotton and Brady Metherall for their article, Settling Scores and Gambling on Goals. So Brady and Matthew. Right. So congratulations. Just hold it there there has to be a publicity shot. Thank you very much. Congratulations. Right. So moving on, the next item is the John Blake University Teaching Medal for 2023. And the IMA is delighted to announce Professor Chris Sangwin of the University of Edinburgh is the winner of the 2023 John Blake University Teaching Medal. John, it's the John Blake. Chris, I'll ask you to come up in a second, but let me just read the citation. The John Blake University Teaching Medal was introduced in 2020 and is awarded to an individual in recognition of their significant and sustained contribution to the teaching of mathematical sciences at university level. Professor Sangwin is Professor of Technology Enhanced Science Education in the School of Mathematics at the University of Edinburgh. He previously worked in the Mathematics Education Centre of Loughborough University, the University of Birmingham, and the UK Maths and Stats and OR Network, the MSOR. He was awarded a National Teaching Fellowship in 2006. He's known internationally for his work on computer-aided assessment, including the development of a mathematics e-assessment system, STACK, system for teaching and assessment using a computer algebra kernel. STACK is now widely used in universities across the UK and internationally, and indeed at my institution. STACK saw a significant increase in use during the COVID-19 pandemic, as mathematicians urgently needed a way to support students studying remotely. STACK is currently supporting the learning of a diverse body of students at over 1,500 sites across 6 continents and has been translated into over 20 languages. It is used by a commercial textbook publisher, Physics Curriculum and Instruction, to provide online support to their learners. Chris's work is grounded in research and scholarship. In developing STACK, Chris has thought deeply about the nature of teaching, learning, and assessment in mathematics, often referring to historical teaching texts and basing his thinking firmly in the educational literature. He is the author of a number of books, including Computer-Aided Assessment of Mathematics and the popular science book, How Round is Your Circle, which illustrates and investigates many links between mathematics and engineering using physical models. It is a testament to John Blake's legacy that as director of the MSOR network, it was he who appointed Chris to the network in 2000 as a research fellow with a remit to research and promote effective teaching of higher education mathematics within the UK. Professor Sangwin is an inspiring teacher and an internationally recognised leader in the field of mathematics assessment, and in particular computer-based assessment. He has had significant influence on mathematics teaching and learning at many universities within the UK and overseas. His work has inspired and enhanced the learning of tens of thousands of students across the world. For this reason, he is a worthy winner of the 2023 John Blake University Teaching Medal. Chris.
So, wrapped up. Congratulations. Really well deserved.
So Chris is now going to give a talk. Have we got everything lined up? So this will be about, is it half an hour? What were you told? 1840. Yeah, 35 minutes. Oh, right. I have to pass across. As a, oh, you've got one.
Yeah. Wide for sound. Thanks, everyone. I've decided to choose the title, Why I'm Not Too Worried About AI, as the subject of my talk, because I'm getting asked a lot. A lot of people are just quite blunt. Chris, surely this means it's the end of your software when AI can just do everything. And so I thought we'd just address that head on today. But before I get into that, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to my family who are here. Thank you to my colleagues. Thank you to John Blake, who appointed me. Thank you to the IMA. Thank you to my students, and so on. So thank you, everybody, and thank you for coming this evening. I thought it'd be fun to start with some very recent news. Monday, there's now a $10 million prize for an AI that will gain a gold medal in the International Maths Olympiad. Right? That's now the goal of AI research as of Monday. I've no doubt that will happen. I'm sort of working on the assumption that that will happen, and yet still I'm not too worried about that, as I'll go on to explain. So let's start here, a hound and the hare. A hound starts in pursuit of a hare at a distance of 30 of his own leaps from her. He takes 5 leaps while she takes 6, but covers as much ground in 2 as she in 3. In how many leaps of each? So, has anyone seen this problem before? No? Anyone seen anything like it? Must have seen something like it. Okay. So I academically inherited this book, Examples in Algebra by Tukey, 1904. And for some reason, there are a lot of good things in this book. It's a lovely little book. This problem jumped out at me for no reason as I was reading it, and I've used it a lot. And then about a decade later, I found out from this history that this is actually a very famous problem. It's actually in the first European version is Alcuin of York, AD 790, Problems to Sharpen the Youth. Right? So Alcuin's a fascinating character. He was, I think if I remember rightly, he ended up in Charlemagne's court. He travelled all around Europe. He wrote widely and was a leading scholar of the time. Some of you may remember the goat, the cabbage, and the wolf crossing the river problem. Have you seen that one? That's in this book as well, right? So I think he wrote that problem. But actually it goes back even further. It goes back to basically the same hound and the hare problem goes back even further to ancient China, according to Sweats. And you can imagine people were trading problems as they're going up and down the Silk Road, talking to each other, challenging each other with problems and puzzles and all the rest of it. So I think mathematical problems and puzzles are artifacts. We should take care of them. I think they have a history, they have an important cultural significance. And as a discipline, we often attribute theorems, Dumoir's theorem, we remember who, not that they're always named after the right person, of course, but that's a whole different talk. But nevertheless, we don't look after puzzles and problems in quite the same way. But they're enduringly popular. Nearly the whole population likes puzzles. It doesn't matter. These I'm not talking necessarily about things that are only at the far end of research at all. So there's this scale of a Sudoku in a newspaper right the way up to an Olympiad problem or a research problem. I just don't see any hard boundary. And I think if we are going to continue to teach mathematics and value mathematics in an AI age, we need to value that whole spectrum, right? And I really think that's important. So I think of these kinds of famous puzzles as like the mathematical equivalent of a poem, a verse. And each generation should learn them and struggle with them and whatever. Because ultimately I think we want our students to be well versed. That's a compliment, right? And by struggling with these puzzles and learning them yourself and doing them yourself, you become experienced, practiced, skilled, knowledgeable, and so on. Okay, so here's another one. Arthur is pro-Brexit and Cameron is pro-Remain. Arthur shakes his fist at Boris and Boris shakes his fist at Cameron. Okay? Prove that a Brexiteer shakes his fist at a Remainer. Right. Okay, that's the puzzle. Okay, so I'm just going to do what mathematicians do, and that's just get rid of some of the noise, because it's hard. You know, that's the first step, isn't it? Get rid of some of the noise. We've got A for Arthur, who's a Brexiteer. We don't know whether Boris is Remain or Brexit. Cameron is a Remainer. And we're trying to match this pattern, aren't we? We want a Brexiteer to be pointing at a Remainer. That's what we have to prove. And so there are two cases. Boris is either Remain or Brexit. So if Boris is Remain, then Arthur's shaking his fist at Boris and we're done. If Boris is Brexit, then Boris is shaking his fist at Cameron and we're done. So in every possibility we're done, but we don't actually know which one happens. Okay? That's slightly weird. We can prove that something happens without knowing how it happens. And you think this is just a silly puzzle, but actually I don't think it's a silly puzzle at all. I think it's a very useful pattern of thought. So if you want to prove that an irrational power of an irrational number can be rational, then we're going to use this same pattern of thought. So a rational number just means we can write it as a fraction. And it's somewhat surprising that not every number can be written as a fraction, just in sort of bald terms. But root 2 is a very famous example. You can't write that as a fraction. And so we're going to, like pulling a rabbit out of a hat, mathematicians say, I'll consider this. And so we're going to consider root 2 to the root 2. Now, I would be very surprised if you could write root 2 to the root 2 as a fraction. I mean, it just, my mathematical experience and my mathematical sense says that's just unlikely, okay? But it could be rational, and if it was rational, then we would be done, because an irrational power of an irrational number is rational. On the other hand, if it's not rational, then we'll just take another root 2 power and do a little bit of algebra, and we get 2, which is 2 over 1 is a fraction, it's a rational number. So this is exactly the same pattern of thought that is used in the silly puzzle as in the maths. And that's what mathematicians do. I mean, there are not that many really valuable different intellectual moves when you start organizing knowledge and seeing the same arguments coming again and again. And we need to recycle them, and you need to remember them and organize them, and that's the nature of education, isn't it? So when we look at patterns, there are a number of patterns that we use in mathematics. The pattern of two loci is a geometrical way of breaking a problem down and then recombining it. We have superposition, we have recursion, and we have the Cartesian pattern. And these legitimate patterns of thought become what we consider to be acceptable mathematical proofs. And Pollier's How to Solve It is a book which I really like, but his other books, he's written Induction and Analogy. These patterns come from his other book, Mathematical Discovery. I think these books are just superb, and I recommend them to anyone who hasn't read them. I'm not going to talk about these patterns. I'll just talk a little bit about the Cartesian pattern. So this comes from Descartes' Rules for the Direction of the Mind, a good title. And here, so Descartes says we should reduce any kind of problem to a mathematical problem. I think that seems reasonable. And then we should reduce any mathematical problem to algebra. Well, forgive Descartes, that is his contribution of algebratizing geometry, and coordinates is part of turning algebra into geometry. So he's going to reduce it to algebra. And then reduce any algebra problem to a single equation and solve, and we're done. That's the Cartesian pattern. And Pollier's very wry about this. He just says, the more you know, the more gaps you see in this project. Well, that's fair enough. But what I want to say today is that actually solving the equation is only the last step in all of this. So the actual mechanical process of that is only just one part of the whole pattern of thought. We have to set up the equation, we have to interpret the solutions, and sometimes we have to reject some solutions because they're not physically realistic. So all of that is part of this. This is a kind of unglamorous end of education. These were my exam scripts in 2017. And you can see why people want to use technology to mark the work, right? It's not very glamorous, it's repetitive. Any task that requires repetitive work from anybody, even especially experts, we want to try and automate that. And recently, colleagues in Kenya are using my software, and this is not my summer, right? I'm well supported in Edinburgh, but other colleagues in other places have a very different experience of teaching. So it's quite natural that we're going to use technology to solve some of those problems in education. But at the end of the day, the tool is a means to an end. I'm not writing this software because I want to write the software. I'm writing the software because I've got a job I want to do. And ultimately underpinning all of that is that we need tests worth teaching to. This is Hugh Burkhardt at Nottingham, for whom I have a huge amount of respect. And so I am sure at some point my software will be superseded, probably by something better. That is the inevitable lesson from educational technology. And I think well, my first computer had 1 kilobyte of memory. I was in the schools in the 1980s when Logo came along in the BBC Micro, so thank you, Celia, for all your work on that. I'm the product of that. I've grown up with computers. They have come along in my generation. And when you look back at all the educational technology that's come and gone, I'm sure that will happen. So I want to make sure that I'm trying to focus on the thing that really matters, which are the things that students do and what they learn through that. That's ultimately the most important part. So this is why I'm not too worried about AI, really. I'm really not. Actually, I'm very excited about it, but that's a different part of it. Because whatever happens, you still have to understand what comes out of the machine. If it suggests something to you, this is irrational, you need to know what that means. And AI might help you understand what that means, but you still need to situate what the AI tells you in what you already know. So there's no shortcut to that. And then there's a basic pleasure from solving a problem. There is, and everybody knows that. That's not going to go away. There are computers that beat nearly everybody in chess and Go, and people still play chess and Go. We should have the same view on mathematics, I think. And then you get recognition from your peers. If you do something difficult, people respect you for it. That's true in sport, it's true in drama and literature, and I think it will continue to be true in maths. So that could be an Olympiad medal, that could be a school exam, could be a whole range of ways that we recognise people who've achieved something, and I don't think that's going to go away. Of course, you could cheat and use an AI, but again, that's about how we set up those systems to make sure that it is the person doing the work. And then there's the importance of aesthetics and value, which I think this is something that we will have a lot more opportunity to discuss. If AI helps us reduce the need for repetitive work within the subject, and there will be things we throw away from the subject, no doubt, then perhaps we can concentrate on aesthetics and value judgments. And I find elementary mathematics endlessly fascinating. I don't think there's any shortage of that, even at the elementary end of a subject at all. This is not about just the, of course it exists at the advanced research. That's why people like advanced research in maths. Of course it does, but it also exists in the elementary side of the subject. For those people who haven't done any maths research, it's not actually difficult to come up with a novel theorem. Okay, it's just not. If you just choose large numbers and do something with them, the chances are nobody's done that before. You can prove something, and formally speaking, you have some novelty. But nobody's going to be very impressed by this, are they, really? They might be a little bit more impressed if you realise it's not quite so obvious and there's something interesting about this. But this actually comes from what I think is still the shortest maths paper ever published. A direct search on this computer yielded this weird observation as the smallest instance in which 4 fifth powers sum to a fifth power. This is a counterexample to a conjecture of Euler that at least n nth powers are required to sum to an nth power. So suddenly we're in really good company now. I'd be very delighted if I found a counterexample to a conjecture by Euler, one of the greatest mathematicians ever. So value judgments and aesthetics and all these things matter a lot to the subject. And it may be that AIs start to suggest value judgments, but I'm not sure that's going to happen in the near future. And I think humans are very well placed to decide on these things. So again, for these kinds of reasons, I'm not at all worried about AI. But just to give you a sense of why I'm enduringly fascinated with elementary mathematics, and I don't think there's any shortage, I'm going to talk about the area of a plane triangle. Okay, right? I think that would be a good place to start. So the area of a plane triangle is half base times height. Yeah? And a couple of years ago, I came across a fascinating paper by Baker in 1885. And he lists over 120 different formulae for the area of a triangle. This is a snapshot from his paper. He doesn't prove any of them. He just lists them all. And you actually have to get to formula 38. His first formula just uses the side lengths. The height is not the most obvious thing. You don't always get given the height. So you might just get given the 3 lengths of the sides of the triangle, and that's where he starts. And he sorts them all out and arranges them. But you have to get to 38, and then you keep going, and it's this one, 73, right? This is his formula for the area of a triangle, SR. And that, I think, is the simplest one in his list, because there's no numerical constant, and it only uses 2 letters. So all these letters relate to different things in the triangle. So what are R and S? Well, S is half of the length of the perimeter. Okay, so it's called the semi-perimeter. So you have really got a numerical constant. It's just packaged up in S. So there is a numerical constant in there, but let's forget about that. And R is the radius of the largest circle you can draw inside the triangle. Yeah? Okay? So why on earth would the area of the triangle be half the perimeter multiplied by the radius? Okay, not entirely obvious. Well, let's just draw more triangles. Let's draw lots of right-angled triangles. Okay, so I've now drawn 6 right-angled triangles, and instead of A, B, and C, I've relabeled the side lengths. So we've got this side is X, and this side is Y. So we've got 2 triangles that are the same here, and 2 triangles that are the same here. So what we can do is we can just rearrange those triangles. And we've got a rectangle, which is R times S, and then we're done. Okay? So I think that's beautiful. I think it's lovely. And it's interesting. I've been doing some research on the nature of proof, and I've been asking students and colleagues about the rigour in the subject. What is a rigorous proof? And in fact, rigour turns out to be a relative concept, and most of us agree on what is and isn't rigorous, in fact. And surprisingly, pictures are not inherently not rigorous. So professional mathematicians are quite happy to accept some pictures as being equally rigorous with algebraic arguments. Not always, but the idea that a picture is not rigorous doesn't stand up to research with real mathematicians. And I think this is perfectly rigorous. I mean, yeah. But it doesn't stop there, in fact, because when you've got a good idea, then we should carry on and see where we can get to with this good idea. Well, we can do the same thing with a square. Draw a circle inside a square. We need 8 triangles now, but we can do the same thing. Do the same thing with a hexagon. Okay, just keep going. You can do that same thing with any regular polygon, in fact. So let's just keep going and keep going and keep going. And those of you who know the history of how Archimedes found the area of a circle, he did that by approximating it by lots of polygons. So what is the area of a circle? Well, the length of the perimeter of a circle is 2 pi r, so S is pi r, and r is just r, because it's the largest circle you can fit inside a circle. And yeah, so that works as well. Yeah, so the same formula works. So immediately, a mathematician would ask, for what shapes does that formula hold? Right? I mean, it holds for more than the regular polygons. It holds for more than polygons. It's not true for all shapes, right? So what looks like a silly, trivial area of a triangle, we all know the area of a triangle, can be crafted into an interesting set of problems that takes you to what I would suggest is real mathematics, characterizing all the set of objects for which an interesting property holds. That's what maths is all about. So I'm endlessly fascinated about with elementary mathematics, and I think there's plenty more to be interested in. So we did this. I've taken over what's called an institute. John Mason and Anne Watson set up a mathematical institute, and every summer we get together. We limit it to 25 people, and we go to Ripon Cuddeston College near Oxford, and we get together and we just solve mathematical problems together. Right? That's what we do. And it's Jenny Back and Corinne Andrews and I have taken over from John Mason and Anne Watson, who've retired. They ran this institute for more than 20 years. There have been a whole range of mathematical topics. And for me as a teacher, the challenge is writing this sequence of problems. This summer, our topic was mathematical surprise. And we have a range of colleagues, from colleagues who only teach primary and never studied mathematics at university level, right up to people like me who only teach at university and have never taught in school. And we have a range of people who have a lot more experience than I do. So coming up with 9 sets of problems that are going to surprise that group of people is a certain intellectual challenge that I really like. And this area of a triangle seemed to be something that everyone could get started on, and that was a sequence of problems that I wrote for that. So it's all very well talking about problems and puzzles and Olympiads and all this kind of poems and all the rest of it. But the truth is, if you want to get good at something, it takes a lot of hard work. And this is just not very glamorous. It's just absolutely not very glamorous, right? And I'm convinced that if you want to become a good mathematician, you are going to need to learn a lot of algebra, and you are going to have number facts at your fingertips. However good the technology, you're going to have to notice patterns. This is poor Joseph Phillip. He's got 30.5 pounds of tobacco for £3, 12 shillings and 5 1/4 pence. And he is writing out his long division. There's just pages and pages of this beautiful handwriting, right? I mean, it's just amazing. And of course, a computer and a calculator was a profession. You had to get good at that because there was no alternative. So the one thing that I'm quite excited about AI is because it will give us an opportunity to have another conversation about what matters in our discipline and what doesn't and how we get there. And as a discipline, we've had those conversations before. We had them with computer algebra, we had them with calculators, we had them 400 years ago with slide rules. Right? So we're constantly having those discussions about what matters. Other disciplines may not have had that technology disruption before. I can't speak for other disciplines. Maybe they did in history, right? And maybe AI is going to write essays for you now, and they haven't had to have those discussions. But as a discipline, we have had those discussions, and some of that discussion is relevant to what we're facing with AI now. And even with practice, even with what appears to be boring practice, I think with the design of interesting materials, we can design interesting materials even in situations which appear to be boring practice. In music, there's this idea of an etude, which is a study or technical exercise, but it's still a nice piece to play. That's the idea of an etude. And Colin Foster, a colleague for whom I have every respect for, has tried to develop this idea in a mathematical format. Let's have some practice that leads you somewhere interesting. And I think it's very useful to have names and to discuss the design of materials, having names for things like etude. No disrespect to Colin, but I don't think this is an entirely novel idea. I think teachers have been doing this for a very long time. Tukey was doing it in 1904. This is another set of exercises that jumped out of me on the page. Draw the graphs of x squared, minus x squared, 2x squared, x squared plus 2.5. blah, 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 blah. Well, he kind of gives the game away here of where he's going, doesn't he? This looks like a set of boring exercises. In fact, they are highly structured and carefully designed, right? So, and this is why I like this book, because a lot of his things just appear to be pages and pages, a random page here, pages and pages of stuff without, when you just look at it, but a lot of it's like this. It's beautifully structured and very interesting. Plenty of other people have done things like this. I came across this book a couple of years ago, Crowder's Adventures in Algebra. So for Crowder, algebra is university year 1. Proof that root 2 is irrational, proof there are infinitely many primes, those kinds of classical results. And here's a typical page in the book, page 99. It doesn't matter where we are. The point is that he asks you a question, and depending on your answer to the question, you go to a different page in the book. So again, in the 1980s, we had these fighting fantasy books. You're walking along a corridor, you see a troll, do you talk to it, fight it, or run away? I mean, it's that sort of thing, isn't it, right? And it's the mathematical equivalent of that 20 years earlier. I had a lot of fun reading this. I think the book is beautifully written, beautifully designed, and very interesting. And he's doing this with multiple choice questions. Now, I've written some sophisticated technology that tries to mark people's homework, but good design can do interesting things with very simple tools. We have very good tools now, right? So I think the actual design of the materials is what will endure. There's another one. Okay. And then I do want to mention these are advanced university books, but Bob Byrne has written 3 books, and for those people that haven't seen them, there is no text in these textbooks. They're just problems for people to do, right? And students find these textbooks particularly challenging because you do have to do everything yourself. That's quite a high bar. So, yeah. That's why I'm not too worried about AI. I think, you still have to understand the stuff. You still want the pleasure of doing it for yourself. That is a basic human part of culture, part of who we are as human beings. And it is important to recognize other people. Thank you for recognizing me today. But that matters. But we have responsibilities to set up that recognition in ways that do actually correspond to something valuable, not just doing something because we've always done it. That's the challenge, isn't it? And part of that is acknowledging the importance of aesthetics and value judgments. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Anyone? Questions? Yep.
The institution where I work, we're under pressure to reduce the dependence on formal exams. How do you see AI affecting the way we assess students?
Yeah. Well, if you really want to know that it's somebody whose name is on the degree certificate, then you have to have some checks to confirm it's their work. And the most efficient way to do that, to my mind, seems to be to get them all in the same room. Oral exams have all sorts of problems and biases that are well known, and they're very time-consuming to do. I mean, my linear algebra course now has 720 people. The idea that we would give them a half-hour viva doesn't seem to be that sensible. Of course, how many exams do we really need? And those are difficult questions. I don't think there's any alternative to something invigilated, really. But maybe I just lack imagination.
That's what we're being told.
Okay.
Can I urge you to moderate your comment about practice? Think about the way what lyrics come into your head when you're not thinking. Are they all good quality lyrics? There's something important about repetition which isn't high quality. It's part of the way we work. So clearly there's silly exercises, and Tukey's obviously much better than the average sort of rubbish. But repetition and practice are part of the show, and the idea that one can focus on the output, I mean, think of a pianist or a violinist. For them, the practice and the are part of being a pianist. You can't take it away and just play serious stuff.
No, and there is some comfort in doing something that you can do and doing it well and repeating it. Absolutely.
Kids doing Sudoku, I mean, it's admirable.
Nothing wrong with that. And the point I want to make is that it isn't necessarily boring, and that you can have things like etudes that do go somewhere. That's the point I want to make. So yeah, I think we probably agree, Tony. Thank you.
Anyone else? Can I ask an ignorant question? I have a sort of memory that, and I think it was Arab mathematics, was meant to be written in verse. That there was a historical period where part of the way that you embodied the ideas was in the expression through verse or something like that. So your original thing about verse actually fitted into a tradition.
We would have to consult a better historian
does
than
anyone,
Indian.
Does anyone know?
Could well be.
Interesting.
Yeah, but
Sanskrit.
yeah, it may well have been that. Yeah. So that would add to your versification. But anyone else? I've got one other question, if I'm allowed. But so the other question is, with your interesting problems and the ones you showed where they were leading somewhere and they were getting, what happens to people who don't get it?
Yeah, I mean that's. But then. Well, okay, so the skill of the teacher is to devise enough hints, right? So when I use that puzzle with when I wrote up that observation about chopping up the triangle into 6 smaller triangles, the question is how much of a hint to go in that direction do you need to give? And that's the skill of a teacher, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Right? So if we want everyone to get there, then we would probably give more hints or walk around the class and drop a hint. If it's an Olympiad problem, you're not going to give so many hints because you really want to see who can do it on their own. So that does depend on the circumstance and the consequences and what you're trying to achieve, I think.
Any last question? Well, Chris, thank you very much. And I love the idea that the simple can actually sort of create new thought. It's really neat. So we're moving on. The last talk and presentation for this evening is Professor Julia Gogg, OBE, who is the winner of the Hedy Lamarr Prize for Knowledge Exchange. So this award was introduced in 2020 and is awarded to a mathematician who demonstrates meritorious knowledge exchange in mathematics and its applications. It was first awarded to Professor Rebecca Hoyle of Southampton. Who was from Southampton here? Someone was from Southampton today. This year it's Julia Gogg. So Julia is Professor of Mathematical Biology at DAMT, the Department of Applied Mathematics and Theoretical Physics in the University of Cambridge. She's also the David N. Moore Fellow in Mathematics at Queen's College, Cambridge, and a keen supporter of mathematics outreach and the director of the Millennium Mathematics Project. However, it was during the pandemic where she showed her mathematical greatness. She was a member of SPI-M and SAGE, where she made a very active contribution towards the COVID-19 response at the highest level and was frequently seen on television explaining the maths behind COVID to a general audience as well as to policymakers. She was and remains co-lead of the Juniper Consortium, which brought many universities and disciplines together to fight COVID in a truly interdisciplinary fashion. During this period, she also managed to find time to work with an outreach journal as well as appearing alongside the Deputy Chief Medical Officer in presenting the Royal Institution Christmas lectures. Our winner is an outstanding mathematician who cares passionately about knowledge exchange and outreach, going beyond any reasonable expectations by collaborating with the medical community. Who wrote this? Is that an unreasonable expectation? What have you got against the medical community?
My sister.
The media and education resource designers to develop activities which benefit schools across the UK. Because of this, she was awarded the Royal Society's Rosalind Franklin Award and lecture for her achievements in the field of mathematics. This is a fitting award for a brilliant mathematician and an exceptional exponent of knowledge exchange. I would like to invite Julia Gogg to join me and receive her award.
Thank you. Thank you.
One of those, and you get one of those. You should do it.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. And Julia will give her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the wonderful award. But not only that, to be invited to give a talk with no instructions at all. What a joy. So you're going to get just some random stories from me tonight, because this is what I want to do. Bear with me. So this is the Centre for Mathematical Sciences at University of Cambridge, where I work. This isn't going to work, this thing. Hello? Oh, I need to do the thing, don't I? Yeah. Most of my story is about myself as well. So my day jobs, as Paul said, I'm Professor of Mathematical Biology in DAMT, which is part of the Centre for Mathematical Sciences. We have two departments in there. There's the pure maths and the applied maths. And my other half of my job is I'm a fellow in Queen's College, which is the one with the wooden bridge. So I'm also deputy head of DAMT, now I'm vice president of Queen's, so you notice a pattern that I take on too many jobs. But the story I'm going to tell is I need to go back in time, right? So right back, in fact, Tony, I'm really glad to see you here, because if I go back before being an undergraduate, Tony, you were a big part of that story. I'm quite sure without the British Maths Olympiad and such activities, I would not have aimed for Cambridge and mathematics and been hooked for life. Tony, thank you. So, became a Trinity Mathmo, and enjoyed maths, enjoyed everything about being a student, frankly. I did part 3, which is a weird name for something which is now a master's. It wasn't even a master's then, it was a certificate in advanced studies in mathematics, wasn't it? So I have a certificate for my 4th year. This is the less glamorous DAMT as it was at the time. During part 3, there was a course on nonlinear pattern dynamics, and the lecturer of this part of the course was one Rebecca Hoyle, the previous winner of the Hedy Lamarr Prize. Part of this, she said, go and read this bit of this book about nonlinear pattern formation. So this is Jim Murray's amazing book of mathematical biology, which is responsible for a lot of trouble. So I read it, and it was actually quite provoking. I went straight onto the epidemics section as it happened. And I can follow the equations. I can see, okay, S, I, R. Yeah, you can write down equations and call that susceptible. In fact, but in what sense has this object got anything to do with a real messy human epidemic? Is it possible for mathematics to actually tell us something about a real epidemic? Is it possible to tell us something of use about an epidemic? Or is this just a mathematical fiction and it's kind of entertaining? And that, I'm not quite angry, but it sort of provoked me to think about it more and more in a way that other parts of mathematics hadn't hooked me until then. And with the advice of Rebecca, actually, I made the jump. She said, if you really want to do math bio, go into a bio department, go and do it. So I went, I never quite got critical escape velocity to get away from Cambridge, I'm still there now, but I went as far as the Department of Zoology for my PhD. The whale skeleton. Since then, it's been turned around by 90 degrees and put inside a shiny building. So it's moved a bit, almost as far as me. PhD was in the disease dynamics group. Brian Grenfell was the lead of that group. This is recent Kyoto Prize photo. That was sort of around the millennium turn, 98 to 2002. My PhD, do you want the 10-second version of it? So SIR models, right? So susceptible, infected, recovered. Who's heard of them before? Fantastic, right. So now suppose I've got 2 strains, 2 variants, right? So what do I mean by S? Susceptible to both, susceptible to one, susceptible to the other, susceptible to neither. Okay, I need 4 S's. Now suppose I've got 3 strains. How many S's do I need? Lots, 8. So it's 2 to the n problem. So if I want to understand influenza evolution, I'm going to need hundreds of variance in a given year to understand how one emerges. You can't out-compute that, right? I'm not worried about AI in that one. When the number of equations you need is more than particles in the universe, that's not going to be. So it turns out you can make it tractable if you take a very particular set of assumptions and view the system in a particular way by thinking about how does the system look to the population, how does the system look to the viruses. Anyway, that's the equation. The rest of the thesis is sorting out how that relates to all the alternative models, which are more complicated, and lots of theorems and proofs about that. But during my PhD, do you remember the foot and mouth outbreak in 2001? Yeah. So I'm in year 3 of PhD. This happens. It's huge. You remember it was disruptive to day-to-day life, not COVID scale disruptive, but pretty disruptive. I think we've all got a story of something which was cancelled and moved, etc., right? And Brian was very heavily involved in the mathematical modelling of that, and keep an eye on this name, Matt Keeling, who was in Brian's group at the time. This was very exciting. Brian kept me at arm's length from this. I wanted to be involved. I really wanted to be involved. And he was like, no, you get on with your strain stuff, do your thesis. But the foot and mouth stuff was Brian's group interacting with government. There was a lot of input and discussion with policy at the time. And all the elements of the COVID-19 story were there in terms of how science and government fit. If you remember, there was a political side of whether we could have a general election then or not. There was crappy data, there was data problems, there was lots of blaming the modelers, there was lots of the modelers looking back afterwards, did we do the best thing we could have? Could we do this in a better way? What do we need to do next? But there was a buzz around it as well, and there was a sense that the models were contributing to policy in a useful way. And I found that quite interesting, even though I'd been kept away from it at the time. But that's important for what happens next. So I finished my PhD. I move on to a research fellowship that brings me from Trinity to Queen's. I then have a Royal Society URF position from 2004. Still in zoology, but actually 2 years into it, I moved to maths, back to maths. A part of the Royal Society URF, there's various training courses and things you have to go on. I'm not sure many people would say that a training course was pivotal in their career, but one was, right? Compulsory science communications training course. It was run by Judith Han, who was presenter of Tomorrow's World when I was growing up, and it was Judith's husband as well running it. We had to do lots of homework beforehand. We had to bring things. We had to give short talks. Oh, it was hard work. And I came away with 2 things from that. One, an absolute agreement that I would engage with the next opportunity for science communications that came my way. Just having the guts to do that, and also having promised someone I would do it. And it was quite clear. Judith Han was quite clear. My writing was not my strength. Maybe don't do the writing. Just maybe talking, maybe to kids. It's like, okay, I can start there, great. It's good to know where your strengths lie and don't lie. The next email to hit my inbox looking for someone to help with something was from Dr. Jenny Gage, who was part of the Millennium Maths Project, and it was, what has maths ever done for us? Come up with short paragraphs of things. Unfortunately, I couldn't actually make it to the session that she'd organised, but I thought, I promised. So I wrote, unfortunately, I can't make it to this, but I am interested in other... Within minutes, we'd arranged to meet for a coffee, right? And the upshot of those discussions was I took part, worked with Motivate, which was a unit that Jenny ran. Bear in mind, this is 2006, I think. It looks like Zoom now, doesn't it? But these were video conferencing with schools almost 20 years ago, right? This is a very clever use of technology. And that was the first time I came in contact working with Millennium Maths Project. And I'm really delighted Julia Hawkins is here this evening, who's the Deputy Director of the Millennium Maths Project then and now. Yeah, it was the start of many things, wasn't it? Yeah, so you can just see Jenny there, and Adrian, and we're obviously presenting some epidemic activities. Carefully put the camera so you can't see the kids, because we're not supposed to see the kids. So we came up with... We did some short video conferences, and then we had a series of video conferences where we worked with a set of schools over 6 video conferences. And we gradually realised, actually, you know, they can do more than we think. Actually, they could do some data collection. So the secondary school kids went to the primary school's kids to study the social networks of those groups. We taught them how to record that, how to anonymise that, how to turn it from lists into networks. And if it looks like we're sitting in a broom cupboard in the basement of maths, we actually are. I think they've done that room up now. It's much nicer. And for us, this was an outreach and engagement thing that we wanted to work with school kids. They could run their own projects. If they happened to get good data, that would be a double bonus. And blow me, they did. So they had some amazing data from a number of primary schools, and Andrew Conlon took the lead on writing this up. The spoiler of this is young kids don't really know who their friends are. They name each other at random. Mutual fraction increases as they get older, and then by the time you get to the older ages of, you know, you've got the girl clique, the boy clique. It's totally structured by the top end of primary school, and it was universal across all the schools. It was really interesting. So this was this outreach or was it research? Research leading to outreach, outreach leading to research. Anyway, citizen science. Oh, we're getting there. So. I then got a job in DAMT, the Applied Maths Department, which I carefully managed to be away in zoology for the years they were moving between departments. So I came back to a shiny department. So I was still working on the strain dynamics, because I still am. I can't leave that problem alone. I keep thinking I'm done with it, and then it's like, hey, what if? Brain keeps doing that. I've worked on some bioinformatics, some looking for interesting signals in viral genomes. That was working with virologists. That wasn't a challenge, that was an absolute joy, but it's a different thing. It's not theorem proof, it's are you sure enough to make your friend go and do a long experiment? It's a different level of certainty. And when you get nice steep signals like that, sure. I worked with experts on the immune system, so this is with Claire Bryant's group in the vet school. This is a macrophage, and this is the odd one out. This is not viruses, these are salmonella bacteria that are literally glowing green and red. And trying to understand the infection dynamics. It's just population dynamics writ small, right? The immune dynamics, super interesting. And then the space was really sparked by the flu pandemic in 2009, where we got some beautiful data from the US, which kept me busy for some years and has been the source of 1.5 PhD theses since then. So what happened next? Well, indeed, citizen science. It worked with the school kids, right? So what if we use the whole UK public? So this was a TV programme, which was broadcast in early 2018. And this is a talk in itself, but the speed version is we asked people to use their mobile phone to track where they were using GPS for a day, but also report some information to us, like who they mixed with, how far they thought they travelled, and a few basic things. The whole team is listed there, but particularly Petra Klepatz and Stephen Kistler were crucial in the first stages of the research on this. So the programme went out in 2018, I think it was March 2018. The data collection then ran for a year through 2019, actually it ran a bit further to summer 2019. We got the data late 2019. Remember, this is for some pandemic in the future. We were sort of got all the clearances and the ethical stuff in place, so we could start on it in early 2020. We'd arranged a beautiful meeting when we all got together, and of course, what were we talking about in that meeting? Not the BBC data. We were all full-time on COVID by then. So rather than, triumphant publishing, it was speed preprints. Let's get it shared as fast as we possibly could. The really key things from this for use of pandemic modelling. So this is just representing the spatial dynamics. We knew how people moved and mixed, rural and urban and different. How people mix by age. I've got no axes on here, sorry. Age groups in 5-year age bands from young to old, Darker the orange, the more they mix with that age group. So you've got a diagonal down the middle. What are the off diagonals?
Parents.
Parents and children, yep. And then general splurge of work and socialness. Yeah, so you get, very, very pretty patterns. And with all that, you can put that into models to make more accurate models. That one was particularly for the BBC programme where the source of the pandemic was Hazelmere. So there's all that. And sometimes people say, well, did the stuff actually contribute to the pandemic modelling? And it's quite hard to pin that down because a lot of it's buried in methods of papers which are in government things. But last week, a thing happened which Angela McLean was called up by the inquiry. And if we get to Q&A, if anyone asks me any questions about the inquiry, I think Paul will wrestle you out of the building, so please don't. So this is about the question about, can you segment the population? Can you just separate the under 40s and over 40s and just let it rip in one group and the other group just waits it out? So this is Angela's response, who's now the chief scientific advisor to the government. You don't need modelling. You can just look at the data that we have about household composition, or we have beautiful data about who mixes with whom. I talked a bit about that with the BBC data. By that she means those matrices. And basically, you look at the off-diagonal rectangles, if they were white, segmentation would be an excellent strategy. There's not. There's all kinds of things. There's parents and older children there, lots of workplace mixing, lots going on. So that's just an example. I remember that's science communications, which becomes research, which goes into policy. So that brings us into SPI-M, which is mentioned, the modelling group for advice in the case of influenza pandemics. I now stands for infections, but before COVID it stood for influenza. In peacetime, it was occasional meetings, it was very light, identifying knowledge gaps, considering data flows that would happen in some idealised, very calm world, and none of that happened like that. But it was a standing group. If you look at what we were doing before the pandemic, it was reasonable things. What would happen in unmitigated? What could we do with pharmaceutical countermeasures? So there was, I think, about 3 of us who were independent academics who were on SPI-M pre-COVID, and as things ramped up, that number increased, of course. Just realised I've got Brexit here as well. I'm so sorry, everyone. And this is like, it's the most rubbish multiple choice in the world, isn't it? Just remember how bad those years were. So to sort of calibrate, we went into full emergency mode at the end of January 2020. Then we have the first wave, eat out to help out, next wave, alpha, the vaccine comes in, then delta, Omicron, you get the idea. So we were working full pelt the whole way through this time, and most of us were, I think full-time is an understatement of when we were working on this. One thing so I get to choose what I'm talking about here, I want to tell you about SPI-M is just some government committee. It's not. It's a bunch of humans, right? We're a mix of academics, mix of fully government people, some people who are a bit of both, contract slightly one way or the other, lots of people who work for HPA, it's UK HSA now, and lots of different bits of government as well. So diverse in who we work for, diverse in which sort of mathematical or computational, statistical, medical backgrounds we have. There was a really good spirit in this group, really good. We were trying to seek consensus. We did challenge each other. That was the key thing we had to do. But it was friendly, and we tried hard to ask each other the right questions to understand everything going on. It was a phenomenal amount of work under what can only mildly be called difficult circumstances for over 2 years. But please don't forget, they're a bunch of human beings and a phenomenal set of people to work with. Each of these could be a talk in itself. I did a range of stuff during COVID times, but some of this will not surprise you. The spatial patterns, of course, after working on the 2009 pandemic. B1617.2, also known as Delta. It's a variant, it's a strain. It's about how the virus is evolving, what happens when you've got 2 epidemics interacting. So some of those will make sense as fitting things I was doing before. Some ended up doing a lot about children and schools. And then there was this higher education working group, which was definitely one of the joys of this. So I got to work with Chris and also one Rebecca Hoyle in that group again. That was one of the most fun meetings, to take different mathematical viewpoints of what was going on as well and have a chance to think it through there. But it's the side things. I found a little niche in writing after all, but only 2 lines at a time. Short policy explainers, short explains for policy folk. So this document here, it's called Note on Doubling Times or something harmless. The PDF name was Doubling Times for Classicists, as it went around government. So, which I have a lot of sympathy for, right? So you've got no mathematical background, suddenly you're dealing with an epidemic and some complicated things are happening. And, you know, you're in a meeting and say, oh, the doubling time has increased. And you're like, is that good? Is that bad? It's increased, so it's going to take longer to double. I think that's good. Yeah. So what number are we aiming for with the doubling? We want it to go off to infinity. And we're like, no, we want negative numbers for doubling times. Wait, so we need doubling time to go down first. And it's like, no, we need to go up to plus infinity and come back from minus. What? And I think, OK, I've got some sympathy. Would you like me to write a 1-pager? Yes. I've got things like confidence intervals will be bonkers into these documents that made it around government. So the need for that was there among senior civil servants, the public, and journalists, of course, who are struggling to get their heads around a lot of these concepts very quickly. The idea is, this is not so tricky, going to plus infinity and back from, but some of the ideas are really tricky, really finely nuanced. And the media interest was not neutral, right? There's political, big and small p, considerations there, and very, very emotive. It was a horrible thing happening. So I'm going to come on to the Juniper story now. So Juniper is a consortium. Do you remember Matt Keeling, who we mentioned in 2001? There he is. So together with Matt Keeling, we sort of very naturally coalesced this set of 16 senior academics who were working on COVID in some ways, which meant also all of our research groups. And suddenly we had a national consortium that we could function much more effectively with. Kira tends to avoid photographs as far as I tell, but she's here in person, so we don't need a photograph. So Kira is our senior scientific program manager, who did a phenomenal job in getting us to coordinate together, spotting the opportunities. Marvellous, yet dodged all photos as far as I can tell. Amazing. I'm going to come back to the scientific writing in a moment. This was a huge group, people at the start of the funding, a lot of postdocs. And, you know, as a PhD student, I was kept at arm's length from foot to mouth. That could not happen in COVID. It was all hands to the pumps. We put extreme pressure on our graduate students and our postdocs, and they came good. The work they did for government was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Let's go back to the scientific writing. So this was absolutely built in, and we should have a chat one day and try and remember exactly how it happened, but it happened very quickly, and it was a very natural thing to do. It's to have Marianne and Rachel, as editors of the Plus magazine, actually part of Juniper, right, so built in. So Marianne and Rachel were free to come to any of our meetings, see what was going on. And this is a time when the drawbridge was firmly up from the modellers, because we were subject to abuse and a really hard time. We were taking years to talk about some of the maths we did then. But with Marianne and Rachel, you're part of this. You could see what was going on. You could help us see what was, OK, you need to communicate this, or this is the right time for an article about this. And that was a great model for working as a consortium. And that was, I still don't quite understand how it happened, but Julia, I suspect you had a hand in it. And the idea is yes. This was a screenshot of the work of Plus with Juniper. I think the screenshot must be around December 2020, because it's careful with the Christmas bubbles. Bubbles. But I'm keeping that screenshot because the growth rate of COVID-19 is at the bottom there. Do you remember every Friday we got the R value, as it was called, which had come from a SPI-M meeting on the Wednesday and through SAGE and on Thursday and the next bit of government. Every week it was published, there's a little bit of text around it, and it would talk about R and the growth rates, and rather than trying to explain it themselves, further technical information on growth rate can be found on Plus magazine. It was that article was cited every week for over a year by government. And they said they couldn't have written it better, so it's, you know, obviously it's what they were relying on to use, so they're happy to send the public to the same source. And that was a quite good, I think by that point the idea of we write articles which are simultaneously for government and public was the right way to do things. I'm not going to dwell on this. If you want to know more about this, maybe ask Marion and Rachel over wine, but this is an example of an article that has stuck with me. Angry Square. So I was sitting in a meeting, which, given it's been recorded, may or may not have been a SAGE meeting, when it was unlocking. It was early 2021, vaccines rolling out. Can we release measures? And I could hear some people say, yeah, no, the R number is down far enough so we can unlock things. And other people saying, well, the prevalence is high or the prevalence is low so we can or cannot unlock things. Everyone was talking in terms of one measure or the other, when the phase diagram of this thing is fundamentally two-dimensional. So it's like, if your R is too high, no, you should be shutting things, not opening them. If your prevalence is at NHS crisis, clearly, no, get your prevalence. And then some layers in there, and then the amazing layer, if your R is greater than 1, but you've got no prevalence, yes, you're in New Zealand, do what you like. And it was Angry Square, because I clearly just coloured it in on my iPad. But Marianne, this one was you, wasn't it? To turn it into a more friendly, communicative, making sense to other people's square. And that was with, I think Thomas House was part of the discussions there as well, for Thomas House in Manchester. But if you want to hear more about that, ask Rachel and Marianne. Silver linings, the extreme interest also brought wider opportunities for science communication. People wanted to know about it. It opened some doors to it. Okay, it left people angry, but it also interested. So this was filming for the RI Christmas lectures. Remember, Omicron was on its way in there as well. Probably a week later, we wouldn't have been able to film. Masks were off only for selfies or for the last performance or the actual performance. There's Kath Noakes there. Can anyone spot the Deputy Chief Medical Officer? He's sitting on the stairs. There's JVT. And he's lurking before coming on. This was absolute joy. It was just a career highlight to have an opportunity to do this. And it was really fun working with Kath in the same episode as well. Finally, a plug for a thing which isn't out yet, but we're very, very excited. Paul mentioned the Royal Society's Franklin Prize, and that came with some money, which gave us a chance to do something. So we've been working across the whole MMP, Millennium Maths Project. We're using the maths communication expertise of PLUS, of course, but also the school's engagement expertise from the Enrich side of the MMP. So we have designed a set of lessons for use in mainstream, not the special after school, mainstream Key Stage 3 lessons. This is age sort of 13 or so, the pre-GCSE years. Lots of videos, lots of interactivities, teacher notes, designed for teachers who maybe are not too confident in the maths themselves, and I've broken it. And that's going to be launched early next year. Bits of it have been trialled with schools. It's very exciting. So there's Rachel and I running some epidemics and me confused about something. The Lego exponential growth. And loads of these beautiful interactive, which Oscar has made. Don't underestimate these. I don't click on them during working days because once I start, I'll fiddle with them for ages. And look, I've worked in epidemics for a while. These are still interesting just to play with and see what's going to happen, these different arrangements. So I'm going to sort of end on a realisation and where I got to in this, right? So, you know, in some sense my career is research. That's where we started with this. I've got involved in outreach, talking to schools, getting people interested in mathematics and science and wider problems, communicating the science research ideas to a wider public audience, and policy. Sometimes I like to say I was forced into it because of the COVID-19, but you saw right at the start during my PhD, that foot and mouth application. I was fascinated by that, looking at the textbook, thinking, does this have real applications that interested me? And I felt for a lot of my early career that these things were in tension, right? If you spend your time on this, you can't do that. If you want to get good at this, you can't do that. And I think I've decided, as this audience probably is thinking, obviously this is not true. So I've finally twigged this. For a career in mathematical sciences, these elements are not in competition. They are in total synergy. Whatever combination of this that you find opportunity for and find enjoyment and fulfilment in, they really can work together. And there's a lot of fun and interest to be had in there. So I finally got there with the idea. Thank you.
I don't know how you find time to do all that. It's just extraordinary. I mean, it may be in synergy, but there's a lot of it. Any quick questions?
Earlier in your talk, you mentioned about rubbish data, or words to that effect. I can't remember exactly what you said.
I've used other words for it also.
I'd imagine, particularly in biological and social sciences, data tends to be very, very messy. What's limited work I've done in that sort of area has been messy data. How do you get around trying to do real quantitative modelling when your data is very, very messy?
Oh, that's the whole art. Yeah, I haven't got a quick answer for that. I mean, normally something like the 2009 pandemic data, that was based on massive amounts of medical insurance claims of flu-like symptoms. That's huge amounts of data. It's covered like 50% of the US population. So from that, you can get some signal, but you've got to decide what it is that you can reasonably do with this and what you can't. I can never tell what strain of flu it is from that data, but I can see when it arrives in different cities. And then we spent years sorting it out, trying to see what is it fair to get from this data. Lots of cross comparisons with other known data sets, which so it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy.
And when you hit a serious pandemic like COVID, you don't have time to do that.
You don't have time for 1.5 PhDs on it. You have tomorrow. Yeah. Do your best. And it is just do your best. I mean, Graham Medley captured it brilliantly, which is like a pretty good answer today is much more useful than a perfect answer next week. Not that you'll have that, but it's different working with experimentalists. So the other strands I've worked there, you can do some back and forth and try and understand what can be done in experiments and the setups that different labs have, and try and angle your question. Your overall program is going to be, whatever you're interested in, but you can angle the questions within that to what the capabilities of the experiments are. That needs a lot of back and forth to understand what is doable and what mathematically. We've had these conversations where I've gone to Claire and said, well, how can we do an experiment like this? And she said, no, of course not. That's utterly impossible. At other times I've gone with her, do you think we could maybe do... Yeah, we'll do it tomorrow. So I don't see what the difference in those is. And same thing back from her. She'll be asking, can you do this with maths? And it's like, I don't think so. And other times, yeah, I'll do that this afternoon. So it takes a lot of dialogue to work out what's doable for different fields. So that's not when you've just got a data set, but when you've got an interaction. But yeah, it is the whole art of working out how you can get there with the data.
Kathy.
So all the effort that you and your team and Spire and so on put in within the UK, do you think it was different what we were able to do in the UK with the expertise we had available than, say, other countries? That's a difficult question for you to answer, but
I'll give a few
in the middle of it, do you think that we were better at doing that because we had a great capability in this communication and the mathematics research?
I'll give you a few thoughts, but this is a glass of wine discussion. So one of the things that makes the UK, there's two things. There's one, the amount of capacity of different mathematical groups we had around such a range of different universities. We weren't all taking the same approach. We had a diversity in academe. The other side that gave us an advantage was government has science advice built in. There's scientific advisors in every ministry. Chief scientific advisor, there was a mechanism for stage to spin up, so there was somewhere for us to interface into. There are other countries that could have had brilliant scientific responses, but there's nowhere to dock into. And maybe vice versa, perhaps the science, there was only one or two groups that could really contribute, which didn't give you the diversity and challenge. I'm not saying we're best or better than any given country, but those were the two things I think set us unusual.
So, Celia?
I thought it was absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. I mean, just looking at your research, outreach, communication policy, if you had to pick which of those, can you pick out the main challenge for you? You did this phenomenal work. Which out of all of this was you really intractable and you wish you hadn't done it right or you'd do it again?
Oh, that's evolved over career. Yeah. It's definitely, which one my brain's most on or think is the main thing that I can do something has shifted around. Yeah. a PhD was definitely, I've got to get a PhD out, right? So it's purely the research, and at different times have been different things. Right now, I've got the Juniper Consortium, so I can think about how things work across multiple groups. I've got space to think about how science and policy fits together. What were we really doing with the modelling? Where does it fit? How can we be sure of things? Was there something fundamental we need to think about ahead of, the next one, or whatever the next challenge is, or the climate, Sorry, I'm waffling. There's lots of things there, but also I've got permission to think about outreach and communications in my MMP hat now, which is just a joy. That's part of my day job. So I want to do all of it, basically.
That's the extraordinary thing, and just how much you are doing, and it's wonderful to see. And also, the thing that I would take from this, just the network of people that you work with. I mean, it's not a one-person show, and I think one of the lovely things that you've shown is the value of other people and community. And I think, for IMA, that's something that we've been really working on, but you've really shown that in spades today. So that's lovely. I think that's a signal that wine is imminent, and more community. Can we thank both speakers, Chris and Julia, for their talks and putting the effort into that? They were both absolutely lovely. And thank you.